Okay, welcome back to Week 10, American Literature, a genre study of mystery fiction. Okay, so we're going to kind of finish up our detective fiction project, I guess, this week. And we're going to move on to other parts of the fiction genre. But first, we're going to look at a couple of articles. One is called Frank Gruber's Foolproof 11-Point Formula for Mystery Short Stories. So, as a reader, if you understand the structure, also known as the formula of a mystery story, it makes it a lot easier to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So, Frank Gruber is a pulp mystery fiction writer, and through the years of writing, he's come up with his successful 11-point formula. And we're going to look at how the overall story is structured and how one thing leads into the other. In the same way that you have a structure for a research paper, you would have the same for writing a mystery story. And the other article connects to that, is entitled Plotting the Mystery Novel, the Classic Approach. So between the two of these informative articles, we're going to have a better understanding of a successful formula for writing a mystery short story. Now, I'm not asking you to write a mystery short story, but you could, instead of doing a research paper, if that's something of interest to you. Now, we are getting kind of near the end of the course here, so we do need to start thinking about our final research paper or project. And I'll try to include in this week's email some other options. Those of you that took the Lit 4 class last term, if any of those kinds of projects that you did, that's kind of what we're going to be looking at again. Something a little more creative. However, the mystery genre is huge, and there isn't enough time in one semester to cover all of the aspects and all of the subgenres that are in the mystery fiction category. So if there's something that we missed that you want to do a research paper on, go for it. If there's something that we've talked about that you want to research further, these are all good options for your final research paper. Okay, so enough of that. Again, this week we're going to do a little dissecting, and then we're going to talk about two television detective series. Now, these come from novels and or as a result of the TV series when they stopped producing them, authors picked up the reins and started writing short stories and novels based on the TV show. So the first one we're going to talk about is a detective called Columbo. And after Columbo's series ended another very popular series, kind of took Columbo's place, and that was entitled Monk. A very kind of quirky, funny detective. He's got lots of idiosyncrasies, which makes him more human. And then we're going to talk about switching gears a little bit. So what we've done up to this point is we've taken the detective's point of view. Now, a crime has been committed. The detective is on the trail. He's finding clues. He's got to put the puzzle together and make the arrest. Now, that's just a snapshot of the total story. Something happened before that created the circumstances for what we're reading or viewing now, and something happens after. And that's usually the trial, going in front of a judge, an attorney, preparing your defense, alibis, all of that sort of thing. Now, Perry Mason is a sort of court procedural program. He's an attorney. He usually defends somebody who has been unjustly arrested for a crime, but he has to prove to the prosecutor and the jury and the judge that his client is not the villain. So we're going to take a look at the other end of the story, the court procedural story. And then after that, we've talked about this just a little tiny bit, and that's called the caper story. Now, the caper story is taken from the point of view of the criminal, where the criminal talks about his exploits of being successful or unsuccessful in his crime. Now, generally speaking, usually in a caper story, there is no murder. It's usually a robbery, or could be a kidnapping. They're also called heist stories. It could be exploiting someone for money, that sort of thing. So we're going to have a brief introduction to the caper story subgenre of mystery fiction. And we're going to talk about a real caper by a grandmother type that becomes a serial stowaway on airplane rides, that she somehow gets away with going on an airplane, passing security, and getting away with it for free. And then we're going to talk about a movie that's very well known. It's a part of the caper stories, and that's called Ocean 11, which created a film series in their heist movies about robbing a casino or a bank or that sort of thing. And then our music section of the week is a song called Ride Like the Wind by Christopher Cross. So that's the direction that we're going to be taking today in our lesson. We'll move on to the next slide from here. Okay, so this is from an article from thrillingdetective.com, Frank Gruber's Foolproof 11-point formula for mystery stories. In 1966, prolific pulpster Frank Gruber published Brass Knuckles, a collection of short stories featuring Oliver Quaid, the human encyclopedia. I used to analyze stories, what elements were required. After a period of time, I evolved a formula for mystery short stories. It consisted of 11 elements. With those 11 elements in a mystery plot, I could not miss. I used to work out each element at a time, concentrating on one until I had it finished, then going on to the next. Most writers of mysteries inject the 11 elements into their stories anyway, but by putting them down one at a time, I became conscious of them. Once I had worked out these 11 elements, the job of coming up with plots for mystery stories was greatly simplified. I did not create this 11-point formula at one time. It evolved over a period of about 2 years, beginning back in 1934. I had perfected it by about the middle of 1936. To this day, I claim that this plot formula is foolproof. You can write a perfectly stable mystery story with perhaps only 7 or 8 of these elements, but to get them all into a story, and you can't miss. Here are the 11 elements. 1. The hero. The hero must be colorful. He must have an occupation that is colorful, or he must be a colorful person. In general, I have followed the theory that a regular policeman or detective is not colorful. Just think a moment about the greatest detective in all detective fiction, Sherlock Holmes, and you will quickly grasp what I mean by colorful. Theme. This to me is the most important element of any mystery story plot. By theme, I mean subject matter, what the story is about, in addition to, over and above, the actual murder plot. To illustrate, Death and the Maim is about fighting roosters. I give a reasonably inside account of how game roosters are raised, how they are fought, etc. This is knowledge not possessed by the average reader, and believe me, I did not know it until I read up on the subject for the purpose of this story. My book, The Lock and the Key, was about locksmiths. A liberal education in making locks and keys was thrown into the murder plot. I knew absolutely nothing about locks and keys until I did research on the subject. I know more than is in the book. If you ever read Dorothy Sayers' excellent English mysteries, you will find that theme figures superbly. In The Nine Tailors, the reader learned all about church bells. the art of bell ringing, etc. In Murder Most Advertised, Miss Sayers' discussion, advertising in all its favor. However, knowledge of a subject should be used sparingly. The mystery reader may not be as interested in the subject as you are. Number 3, the villain. Let's face it, the hero of detective fiction is a Superman. The villain must therefore be a Superman or have plenty of assistance. The odds must always be against the hero. Background. The story must be played against a colorful or unusual background. The streets of a big city are not necessarily colorful. If they're not, make them so. 5. Murder method. Here again, the unusual should be considered. Shooting, stabbing, etc. are acceptable, but the circumstances surrounding them should be unusual. 6. The motive. Actually, there are only 2 reasons for murder: hate and greed. But there are many subdivisions of these, and the motive should be as unusual as possible. 7. The clue. Somewhere in the story there must be a clue for the alert reader. Sure, try to fool the reader, but the clue must be there if the reader should want to check back on you after the story is over. Number 8, the trick. In the grand finale, when all seems lost, when the hero cannot possibly win out, he must snatch victory from apparent defeat by a trick, and here the word unusual applies. 9. Action. The story must have pace and movement. It must not consist of talk, talk, talk about the missing button, etc. 10. The climax. A grand, smashing climax is necessary and unusual. 11. Emotion. The hero should be personally involved in some manner. He should be doing this over and beyond the call of duty, or beyond the money paid him for doing it. Okay, so that's Frank Gruber's Foolproof mystery novel writing analysis, and this corresponds to the reader as well when trying to analyze the story. So our second article is from tickettowrite.com, Plotting the Mystery Novel, the classic approach. The classic mystery is popular fiction which follows a specific formula. Clever writers may try to change the formula, but the most clever will cling to it for a very good reason. They work within the bounds of the formula because it works. The following outline serves the modern mystery novel as defined by editors and publishers. A typical story will contain 60,000 to 65,000 words, about 205 manuscript pages, and will be divided into 12 chapters, each approximately 17 pages in length. The classic 12-chapter mystery formula. Act 1, introduction of the crime, mystery, and the sleuth, the detective. Chapter 1. Disclose the crime and mystery to be solved. The crime must capture the imagination. It should have been committed in an extraordinary way, and either the victim or the perpetrator or both should be unusual. Give the reader enough information about the victim to make them truly care that the perpetrator is found out and that justice is served. Early in the story, clues should be revealed which suggest both physical and psychological aspects of the initial crime. Those clues should point to suspects and motive, which will carry the sleuth to the end of Act 1. Some clues should point the sleuth in the right direction. Others may not be obvious or be recognized as actual clues until later in the story. Introduce the sleuth, who will solve the crime early, and have him or her do or say something very clever or unexpected, which will establish that person as unique. Create this character with care. His or her personality should be interesting enough to sustain the interest of the reader to the very last page, or through an entire series of books. It is not necessary to disclose all aspects of the sleuth's personality at the onset. Let the description unfold gradually to sustain interest. Do reveal enough background to let the reader understand the world in which the protagonist functions. Small town sheriff, Scotland Yard detective, Pinkerton agent in the Old West, country squire, investigative reporter in New York City, etc. Ground the reader in the time and place where the crime occurs. It is often useful to include some sort of symbol, an object, or a person in the opening scene, which serves as a metaphor for what occurs in the story. The reappearance of this symbol at the conclusion of the story will create a certain organic unity. Begin with a dramatic event. Some writers offer a prologue describing the execution of the crime in detail, as it occurs, possible from the point of view of the victim or perpetrators. The same information could be revealed by a character through dialogue. Sufficient details should be furnished to allow the reader to experience the event as though he or she were actually there. Another good opening would be to put the sleuth in a dire situation and allow detail of the crime to unfold in due course. Chapter 2. Set the sleuth on the path towards solving his mystery. Offer plausible suspects, all of whom appear to have had motive, means, and opportunity to commit the crime. Select the most likely suspects and have the sleuth question them. One of these suspects will turn out to be the actual perpetrator. At approximately midpoint of Act 1, something should occur which makes it clear to the reader that the crime is more complicated than originally thought. Hints may be given to allow the reader to actually see possibilities not yet known by the sleuth. Chapter 3. The subplot should be introduced. the plot will continue to maintain the progress of the story, but the subplot will carry the theme, which is a universal concept to which the reader can identify. Subplots tend to originate either in a crisis in the sleuth's private life or in the necessity of the sleuth to face a dilemma involving a matter of character, such as courage or honesty. The ultimate resolution of the plot, of the subplot, will demonstrate change or growth on the part of the protagonist and will climatic on a personal or professional level. The climax may coincide with or occur as a prelude to the climax of the main plot. The subplot may be a vehicle for a romantic interest or a confrontation with personal demons of the sleuth. The author can manipulate the pace of the novel by moving back and forth between the plot and the subplot. Act 2. Direct the investigation toward a conclusion which later proves to be erroneous. Chapter 4. Reveal facts about suspects through interrogations and the discovery of clues. Flight or disappearance of one or more suspects. Develop a sense of urgency. Raise the stakes or make it evident that if the mystery is not solved soon, there will be terrible consequences. Chapter 5. The investigation should broaden to put suspicion on other characters. Information gathered through interviews or the discovery of physical evidence should point toward the solution, although the relevance may not yet be apparent. Chapter 6. The sleuth's background is revealed as a subplot is developed. Tell the reader what drives the protagonist, what haunts or is missing in his or her life. Make it clear that the sleuth has a personal stake in the outcome, either because of threat to his or her life or the possibility of revelation of matters deeply disturbing to the protagonist on an emotional level. Act 3. Change of focus and scope of the investigation. This is the pivotal point in the story where it became evident that the sleuth was on the wrong track. Something unexpected occurs, such as the appearance of a second body, the death of a major suspect, or discovery of evidence which clears the most likely suspect. The story must take a new direction. Chapter 7. Reveal hidden motives. Formerly secret relationships come to light, such as business arrangements, romantic involvements, scores to be settled, or previously veiled kinships. Develop and expose meanings of matters hinted at in Act 1 to slowly clarify the significance of earlier clues. Chapter 8. The sleuth reveals the results of the investigation. The reader, as well as the protagonist and other characters, are given an opportunity to review what is known and assess the possibilities. The solution of the crime appears to be impossible. Attempts to solve the crime have stymied the sleuth. Misinterpretations of clues or mistaken conclusions can lead him or her in the wrong direction and logic must be applied to force a new way of grasping and understanding of the uncertainties. Chapter 9. Have the sleuth review the case to determine where he or she went wrong. Reveal the chain of events which provoked the crime. The crucial evidence is something overlooked in Act 1, which appears to have been of little consequence at the time it was first disclosed. The evidence takes on new meaning with information disclosed in Act 3. The sleuth, and perhaps the reader, if a keen observer, becomes aware of the error which remains undisclosed to the other characters. Act 4, Solution, Chapter 10. The sleuth weighs the evidence and information gleaned from the other characters. Based on what only he or she now knows, the sleuth must seek positive proof to back up the yet undisclosed conclusion. Chapter 11, Resolution of the Subplot. The protagonist, having been tested by his or her private ordeal, is strengthened for the final action leading to the actual solution of the mystery. Chapter 12, The Climax, a dramatic confrontation between the sleuth and the perpetrator in which the sleuth prevails. The more impossible the odds have been, the more rewarding the climax will be. Resolution. Revelation of clues and the deductive process which led to the solution. Establish that the case has been solved and justice has been served to the satisfaction of all involved except the villain. Okay, so that's kind of the formula for a 12-chapter mystery novel. Okay, let's talk about a TV series entitled Columbo, and a series of books were written, adapted from the TV series. So this is an article by Martin Stellinga entitled Picking Apart the Columbo Formula. Okay, so I don't know if you're familiar with Columbo, but it was a long-running TV series about a very interesting detective. So the article goes on to say, do you remember Peter Falk as the rumpled detective Columbo? I used to watch this show a lot as a kid. It's not your classic whodunit, but a so-called inverted detective show that showed the murderer at the beginning of each episode. Let's take it apart. An inverted detective is not, as you might think, a detective hanging upside down. No, it's a detective story that doesn't focus on who did it, but how they were caught. Each episode of Columbo started with showing a murder being committed, then spent the rest of the episode showing how the slightly awkward detective Columbo caught the murderer. Usually he had just one more question, until the murderer was unmasked or simply cracked from the pressure. The trick of this genre is in the tension. Tension is created by the audience feeling emotionally invested in a character and what they do. One way to do this is by giving the audience secret information that a character doesn't have, and then having the character's success or failure depend on this exact piece of information. This plays on our deeply ingrained social need. In this case, the audience knows who the murderer is, but the detective doesn't and can only succeed in finding out that information. Interestingly enough, the inverted detective story doesn't differ much from the traditional whodunit. The plot still revolves around the discovery of the specifics of how a crime was committed. But instead of the climax focusing on how the crime was committed, it focuses on the villain getting caught. Okay, so that's our little piece on Columbo. Take a look at the attached video from his program. That's my specialty, Homicide. Okay, let's talk about another TV series called Monk, The Detective Who Walks by Himself, by Kristen Alice Corcos from cappress.com. And she says, Monk, the detective series featuring the obsessive-compulsive, disorder-ridden former police officer played by Emmy winner Tony Shalhoub, has been a hit for the USA Network since its debut in 2002. Heavily influenced by classic series that went before, including Columbo, Monk adds to the formula of the brilliant detective with a few quirks that threaten to make him almost completely non-functional. Monk's premise is that the former police officer turned detective left the force when his wife died in a car bombing meant for him. Adrian Monk was already rather strange. For example, he doesn't like different types of food to touch his plate. Most of us got over that little oddity when we were relatively young. His wife Trudy, however, loved him in spite of this foible, and in spite of his other weirdnesses, such as the need to make certain that all the hangers in his closet face the same way, and the need not to step on cracks, and to touch all the parking meters that he passes on the street. After Trudy's death, he just gets stranger and stranger, and he refuses to take any medication to calm him down. Monk's peculiar personality makes him a trial to deal with, certainly, but he has a good heart, and his friends recognize his kindness, which earns him their loyalty. What motivates Monk is the desire to find his wife's killer. While he seeks the person or persons responsible, he takes other cases, high profile or not, particularly those that interest him. Things that don't match, people who do things out of character, push him to investigate. At the same time, he is often reluctant to involve himself in a case that would force him to confront a phobia. He doesn't like shaking hands, or elevators, or airplanes. In many ways, Monk is frightened of life. Decisions paralyzes him. What unparalyzes him is the need for justice. Monk's obsessive-compulsive disorder and his inability to react appropriately while on duty. For example, he can't bring himself to fire his weapon even when someone's life is at stake, are the reasons for what is turning his quasi-permanent suspension from the San Francisco police into a permanent suspension. Monk does not believe in coincidence. He does not believe in psychic powers. He does not believe in accident. He believes in logic. He believes in reason. He may have OCD and he may have personal problems, but when he has a crime to solve, it occupies his attention. Monk is a very moral show. Adrian Monk is a very moral man. He believes in justice. He goes after crime and criminals, no matter where they may be. Working in the private sphere, assisting the professionals in the public sphere, he still yearns to return to the police force, even though he can still interact with his old friends unofficially, and some of them still respect his work. He knows that the likelihood that he will ever return to that life is small. Meanwhile, he continues to take private cases, or those in which Police Captain Stoudemire invites him to assist. So let's take a look at a video from the TV series Monk entitled "You Were the Only One Who Pointed." Earl Stanley Gardner was an American lawyer and author. He is best known for the Perry Mason series of detective stories, but he wrote numerous other novels and shorter pieces, and also a series of nonfiction books, mostly narrations of his travels through Baja California and other regions of Mexico. His best-selling American author of the 20th century at the time of his death, Gardner also published under numerous pseudonyms. Gardner was born in Malden, Massachusetts, enrolled at School of Law in Indiana. He was suspended after approximately 1 month when his interest in boxing became a distraction. He returned to California, pursued his legal education on his own, and passed the state bar exam in 1911. A law degree was not a prerequisite for bar candidates at the time. Law students could sit for the examination as soon as they felt qualified. He started his legal career by working as a typist in a law firm in California for 3 years. In 1911, he was admitted to the bar and started as a trial lawyer by defending poor people, in particular Chinese and Mexican immigrants. His active interest in defending those who were wrongly implicated or those who didn't have anyone to support them led to his founding the Court of Last Resort in the 1940s, which was an organization that was dedicated to helping people who were imprisoned unfairly or couldn't get a fair trial. Gardner enjoyed litigation and the development of trial strategy, but was otherwise bored by legal practice. In his spare time, he began writing for pulp magazines. While the Perry Mason novels did not delve into the characters' lives very much, the novels were rich in plot detail, which was reality-based, drawn from his own experience. In his early years writing for the pulp market, Gardner set himself a quota of 1,200,000 words a year. When asked why his heroes always defeated villains with the last bullet in their guns, Gardner answered, "At 3 cents a word every time I say bang in the story, I get 3 cents. If you think I'm going to finish the gun battle while my hero still has 15 cents worth of unexploded ammunition in his gun, you're nuts." Early on, he typed stories himself using 2 fingers, but later dictated them to a team of secretaries. He created the Perry Mason TV series. Perry Mason is a distinguished criminal defense lawyer practicing in Los Angeles, California. Most of those clients have been wrongly charged with murder. Each episode typically follows a formula. The first half of the show introduces a prospective murder victim and several people, including Mason's client, who have strong motives to commit murder. Once the crime has been committed, Mason, his private investigator Paul Drake, and his secretary Della Street investigate the case in parallel with the unimaginative police detective, Lieutenant Arthur Tragg, who arrests Mason's client largely on circumstantial evidence, and District Attorney Hamilton Berger, who prosecutes the innocent suspect. In the second half, Mason spars with Berger in the courtroom, either during the trial or the preliminary hearing, in which the district attorney is required to produce just enough evidence to convince the judge that the defendant should be bound over for trial. As the courtroom proceedings advance, Mason often finds the case going against him, so outside the courtroom, either Mason himself or Paul Drake or even Della, his secretary, pursue further leads. As the investigation or examination progresses, Mason and sometimes Berger uncover the morally ugly or even illegal conduct of some of the witnesses or participants, thus complicating the moral and legal intrigue of the case. Eventually, some detail uncovered or remark made inside or outside the courtroom gives Mason the clue he needs to enter into the line of questioning that causes the surprise perpetrator, whether on the stand or not, to break down and confess to the crime and admit to the appalling truth of the motive. With the exception of one episode, Mason's client is always found to be innocent of the charge through the confession of another, and at no time are Mason's clients ever declared not guilty. In the closing scene or epilogue, Paul Drake and Della, the secretary, and sometimes Berger and Tragg, ask Mason what gave him the clue he needed. After Mason explains, he or someone else makes a humorous remark. The Perry Mason syndrome is the manner in which the television crime drama Perry Mason may have affected perceptions of the United States legal system among defendants and jurors. The Perry Mason syndrome purports that due to the oversimplified manner in which trial proceedings were presented on the popular crime drama Perry Mason, Jurors who watched the program would enter trials with misconceptions about how the legal process works. Some argue that Perry Mason syndrome greatly reinforced the presumption of innocence of the defendant, which may have been problematic when the defendant was guilty. Others argue that because Perry Mason was often able to cause witnesses to confess, jurors would expect similar Perry Mason moments to occur in real trials as well. This shifted the burden of truth from the prosecution to the defense. In one case, a juror told the defense attorney that the jury had to convict the defendant because the prosecution's key witness did not confess during cross-examination. Defendants. The Perry Mason syndrome has been cited as a reason some defendants would choose to appear pro se, meaning representing oneself in court rather than being represented by a lawyer. The simplified portrayals of trials on the television series led some defendants to underestimate the seriousness of their predicaments. Consistent viewers of the show may have also believed that they had gained an intimate understanding of the United States legal system and would be able to represent themselves better than an attorney could. This effect may have exacerbated by the tendency for news media to oversimplify their coverage of trial proceedings. So let's take a look at a video how Perry Mason invented the courtroom procedural. Okay, so in addition to Perry Mason, which is a courtroom drama mystery that takes place through the justice system, often the efforts of a defense attorney to prove the innocence of his client by finding the real culprit. Perry Mason and My Cousin Vinny are examples of this genre. So we have talked about the movie My Cousin Vinny before, but let's take a look at this as a real lawyer analyzes the film. Again, My Cousin Vinny is used as a backdrop for law students studying law and procedure. So this is 20 terms you may hear in the courtroom and should know. And by the way, the script for My Cousin Vinny was written by Dale Launer. And 20 years later, in 2017, author Lawrence Kelter begins to write a couple of novel series, kind of continuing on the My Cousin Vinny idea. One of the books is called Back to Brooklyn. Another one is about Vinny maybe going to England to solve a courtroom drama over there. But nevertheless, this is 20 terms you may hear in the courtroom and should know, written by Cooper and Friedman, a law firm, www.cooperandfriedman.com. So, courtroom terminology, appearing in court as a defendant or plaintiff, can be stressful. This situation can be made even more stressful when you aren't clear on what is being discussed. The legal court system in court appears to be riddled with legal jargon. Not being aware of certain courtroom terminology can make an appearance even more difficult. While being able to follow along with what's being discussed can be crucial for your case, it is also important to be able to follow the conversation between lawyers, the judge, and other members of the court. At Cooper and Friedman, we believe in transparency, which is why we want our clients to be educated in courtroom terminology. Below, we've highlighted 20 terms you may hear in court and should know the meanings. The plaintiff. The plaintiff is one side of every legal case. The plaintiff is the person, group, or business who files a complaint with the courts. The opposite number of the plaintiff is the defendant. The defendant is the opposite of the plaintiff and the other party in every legal case. The defendant is defending the complaint filed against them by the plaintiff. Deposition. Depositions are spoken statements taken both under oath and outside of court. They give the defendant and plaintiff a broad idea of what the other will be saying during court proceedings. It is not uncommon for the plaintiff to get a deposition from the defendant and vice versa. Excuse me. Discovery phase. The discovery phase is a phase that occurs prior to the trial, but after the summons has been sent out. The discovery phase is the time when both parties are preparing for trial, collecting all the information they may need for a trial, and writing their arguments. Jurisdiction refers to the court that will hear the civil case. For most civil cases, the court that has jurisdiction decides on which court will hear the case. In federal court cases, jurisdiction is decided upon when the plaintiff and defendant are from different states and the claim exceeds $75,000. Complaint is the catalyst of a legal case and a reason that a court appearance must happen. The complaint comes from the plaintiff, is against the defendant, and is a written statement detailing the plaintiff's claim against the defendant. A summons is a legal document that requires a defendant appear in court. Summons are different than a subpoena in that it requests an appearance and is solely intended for a case defendant. A summons can be hand-delivered by a sheriff, a server, or it can be mailed. Pleadings refer to the documents that are filed with the court handling the case that give basic details on where each party stands. The term pleadings isn't very common, but pleadings are important in every civil case. Settlement. A settlement is what occurs when either the plaintiff or defendant decide to come to terms in regard to their dispute outside of court. Settlements are usually in the form of a monetary payment to the affected party that satisfies them but does not require the party offering the settlement to admit fault. A subpoena is similar to a deposition in that it requires the served party to act. However, while a deposition requires the served party to make a statement, a subpoena requires the served party to make an appearance in court and testify under oath. A misdemeanor is a crime or punishable offense that requires 1 year or less of imprisonment. Common misdemeanors include driving under the influence, burglary, perjury, an assault that results in bodily injury, some cases of domestic violence and obscenity. Felonies, unlike misdemeanors, are more serious crimes that result in over a year of imprisonment when one is found guilty of the charge. Some felonies that are common include drug abuse, auto theft, arson, assault, manslaughter, rape, fraud, and forgery. Approach the bench. The term approach the bench is one commonly used during court hearings and is used by the prosecutor or defense attorney to request a private discussion with the judge overseeing the court case. When a request to approach the bench is made by either the prosecutor or defense attorney, if granted, the opposing party is also able to approach the bench to ensure full transparency of the conversation. Direct examination refers to the time spent by a witness on the stand testifying and answering questions from the attorney who called them. Direct examinations are different than cross-examination because a direct examination is a lawyer interviewing a witness they have chosen for the case. A cross-examination is when a witness is interviewed by the opposing attorney. Move to strike. A lawyer can request a move to strike when something is said by a witness who is testifying that they do not want the jury to consider during their deliberations. The most common statements that are requested to strike from the court records are opinions that the witnesses give when they are not asked to do so. Objection. Everyone who's seen a television show that is based around the court of law or a movie with a courtroom scene has heard a lawyer bellow objection. An objection is what an attorney may pose when they have an issue with the way the opposing party is cross-examining a witness, or a witness makes a statement that is considered hearsay. Sustained is what the judge says when they agree with an objection. A sustained objection requires that the attorney doing the examination must rephrase their question, or the witness being examined must restate their answer. Closing arguments are the final statement made by the prosecutor and defense attorney after the two parties have made their cases. Witnesses have all been called to the stand and cross-examinations have been completed. These arguments often evoke emotion from the jury to sway their feelings on the case. As a result, this can benefit the prosecutor or defense attorney, depending on who is speaking. A mistrial is what occurs when a judge is unable to reach a unanimous decision, a verdict on a case. A mistrial can be called after a jury has deliberated and is unable to make a decision. When a mistrial is declared, the case is eligible to be retried in front of a completely different jury. Otherwise, the prosecution can choose not to move forward with the case. Voir dire refers to the selection of the jury through the process of questioning potential jurors. The questioning is done to ensure that the jury is made up of peers of the defendant who are qualified to form an unbiased opinion based on the facts presented during the trial. Voir dire is also done to make sure that no juror has any conflicting beliefs or personal relationships with the plaintiff or the defendant in the court case. Okay, so that's top 20 terms for a courtroom mystery drama. And let's take a look at a lawyer's view of My Cousin Vinny. Okay, so let's talk about another aspect of detective mystery fiction called the caper stories. And this is from rightonsisters.com. Okay, so the caper story has these elements. When we look up caper in the dictionary, it means to dance or skip about in a lively or playful way. The caper mystery is one that plays most of the mystery genre definition. Capers fit into the cozy mystery category. Think of the movies Topeka, Ocean 11, O. Henry's Story, The Ransom of Red Chief is a classic caper short story. The TV series Leverage was a caper show. Humor, audacity, cleverness, and adventure are hallmarks of capers. Capers include one or more crimes that are open to the reader. They must happen in plain view. Often the crooks are a bunch of colorful misfits who somehow come together and pull it off. Murder is rare in capers, but the crime is outrageous and outsized for the talents of the criminals. Typically, the planning and execution of the crimes like theft, kidnapping, or swindling is the focus, not the solving of the crime. Very often in caper mysteries, the police and our authorities are depicted as inept and bumbling. The crooks are typically likable and either plan something too big or plan too elaborately for a simple crime. The squabbling among the various assembled members accounts for some of the tension and humor. Each person has a specific role, so they can't just dump someone who's hard to get along with. On occasion, a caper involves a single character who must perform all the actions an assembled crew would, but it is more common to have a cast for the crime. If you want to try your hand at caper mysteries, reread the cozy mystery elements. Plan the framing story for the caper. The motivation can be for good or for the money. It's still illicit, but the greater good might be the rationale. Choose the number of crimes and decide how they are related to one another. Plan the caper and the steps needed to pull it off. One hustler is the criminal mastermind, the brains of the operation. The main character has a shady background. There can be co-brains if needed. Identify the group needed to pull off the caper and the special talent each has. They are likely low-level crooks. Select contrastive and complementary traits for the group to build in tension and humor. Identify points in the steps to pulling off the caper where it could go awry. Something always goes awry, and sometimes many things do. Be able to write funny dialogue in scenes that include tension. The main character perpetrator is most often the point of view of the character. Create a crew the reader roots for, or at least is sympathetic to. Plotting a caper mystery requires the author not only to understand how basic mysteries are constructed, but to layer on additional elements. I personally think capers are among the more sophisticated and difficult of all the mystery subgenres. Just getting the tone right is a major challenge in this subgenre. Creating likable crooks takes skillful writing. But maybe the caper mystery is just right for you. Try it. You might like it. Okay, so this is a true caper story that has taken place in the last couple of years. And it's about a serial stowaway, a woman, Marilyn Hartman. And the article is Serial Stowaway Marilyn Hartman likely to get jail, but credit for 500 plus days served, from Chicago CBSLocal.com, a Chicago news report. Okay, so the article goes on to say, a deal has been struck in principle in the infamous serial stowaway case. Marilyn Hartman has been arrested multiple times at O'Hare International Airport. Among other incidents, she was sentenced to 18 months of probation in March after pleading guilty in March 2019 for sneaking past Chicago airport security, boarding a plane, and flying to London without a ticket the year before. She was arrested again in October 2019 after being spotted at Terminal 1 Checkpoint 2 at O'Hare International Airport and was seen attempting to pass through security without a boarding pass or identification. Police said by then Hartman was on probation for a prior trespass incident and was prohibited from going to O'Hare or Midway International airports without a boarding pass. In late March 2020, Hartman was released from Cook County Jail and put on home monitoring after being attacked at the jail, and also after the coronavirus pandemic became a concern for inmates. This current case stems from the probation violation. A judge wants Hartman to go to jail, while her attorney and even the state want probation. Hartman is now likely to get jail and will get credit for 500 plus days she's been in custody already. Her court date is next month. So the story is that she has taken several flights, mostly in the United States, bypassing security without a boarding pass, without paying for a ticket, somehow getting on a plane, getting a seat, flying to her destination, hanging out for a while, and then getting back to her home base. And she's done it several times. Now, she does have some mental issues, but I think the bigger question is what's up with airport security? How can someone get by all of those security checkpoints, get on a plane, not have a boarding pass, get a seat, get a flight? She has even gone so far as to fly to London and I think to Copenhagen, at least another city in Europe, by pulling the same shenanigans. So, although this is a victimless crime, the only person she's really hurting is herself and the airlines for not paying for a ticket. And we will see what happens to her coming up in the next couple of months with her court date. But nevertheless, let's take a look at this YouTube video of the news broadcast of her little real-life caper. Okay, so let's talk about a famous caper movie called Ocean 11, part of a series, and the structure of the caper. And this is from the Dinglehopper WordPress.com, an article by Erin, a professor. And Erin says, I adore Ocean 11. I teach it as the opening every semester of my film analyst class. And I love pointing out Soderbergh's design to the students and watching their eyes get wide as they realize there's another way to look at movies other than passively. But ultimately, I use it to exemplify a film that is plot-focused and a caper, also known as a heist film. Is a great way to do that because they're all about what happens next. And all of the characters are more or less just meant to have specialized skills and look cool. So I'm going to take a couple of posts to discuss how Ocean's 11 fits the caper tropes as laid out by tvtropes.com. Told from the criminal viewpoint, a group plans and executes an elaborate robbery. Normally, a film with thieves and liars in it puts them in the villain category. But from the very beginning, the audience of Ocean's 11 is rooting for Danny Ocean, George Clooney, and his crew. Ocean is immediately cool and charismatic in the opening scene, where the viewer inhibits the point of view of his parole board, and yet the last thing we want is for Ocean to stay on the straight and narrow when he's set free from prison. The parole board leader asks her final question of the scene. Quote, Mr. Ocean, what do you think you would do if released? The little crinkle in Clooney's eyes tell us all what we need to know. He has a job planned, namely, rob 3 casinos in Las Vegas that have a shared vault. These 3 casinos have security systems upon security systems, and robbing even a single casino has never been done before. Ocean is going to need a large and heavily skilled crew to pull this con. Even then, they're all likely to end up in jail or dead at the hand of the casino's owner, Terry Benedict. The criminals are usually more rounded than the opposition, or at least more colorful. Benedict, played by Andy Garcia, as the antagonist of Ocean's 11, is a drab, passionless man. He is pictured here looking at art. He is an efficient, ruthless businessman. He is firmly in control of what happens in his casino, but man alive is he dull. When Tess, played by Julia Roberts, asks him what he thinks of the new Picasso she has procured for his collection, he responds, "I like it because you like it. Dude, get a personality." He never does. We want Tess to drop him like an over-microwaved Hot Pocket. On the other hand, though, none of the characters are exactly round. Each of the Ocean crew have a quirky trait to set them apart. Some are ruthlessly funny, like Frank and the twins. Others have funny accents, like Yen and Basher. They all have some distinguishing eccentricity. Rusty is eating in every scene. Usually contains at least one A-team montage or Avengers Assemble sequence. In the case of Ocean 11, we have the Avengers Assemble trope. It plays as a montage kicked off by the money of the crew. Rubin saying, quote, "You're going to need a crew as crazy as you are. Who you got in mind?" Then we go member by member, giving us a short intro to the characters' quirk and skills, and seeing them pulled into the job. This ends with the whole team together at an informational meeting where Linus, Matt Damon, the only one on the fence, must decide to commit before getting the lowdown on the plan. Then, of course, we get a second montage telling us the plan. It may be played seriously or as a comedy. In the former, there is generally a fallout among thieves after the heist, while the latter may end up on a note of poetic justice. Ocean's 11 is cool, effectively comedy. The laughs range from witty banter between Danny and Rusty, or Danny and Tess, to slapstick between the twins. And we do end with poetic justice. Although Benedict is a seemingly up-and-up businessman, Danny wins back Tess by proving to her that Benedict is just as much of a thief as he is, and more of a liar. Through the con, Tess gets proof that she is not as important to Benedict as his money. He does not truly love her. And even though he chooses his money over Tess, when given the option of one or the other, he is left with nothing but millions of flyers and a whole lot of egg on his face. Sad, not sad. Okay, so that's a little introduction to our caper story movie, Ocean 11. So there's a couple of videos to take a look at if you haven't seen the movie yet. Okay, so let's do our mystery song of the week, Ride Like the Wind by Christopher Cross. And here's some information from songfacts.com. This soft rock classic tells the story of a condemned man on the run to Mexico. The storyline is one not often heard on adult contemporary radio, but the precise instrumentation and soaring background vocals were what, provided by Michael McDonald, helped to make the song a big hit. Speaking about his inspiration for the outlaw theme in this song, Christopher Cross told us, quote, "I grew up with a lot of cowboy movies, serials, and stuff like The Lone Ranger, and these cowboy serials where they were always chasing the bad guy. And I lived in San Antonio, Texas, near Mexico. So there was always this allure about if you could get to Mexico, you could escape the authority. So getting to the border of Mexico was a fascinating thing to me." Christopher Cross dedicated this song to Lowell George, formerly of the band Little Feat, who died in 1979. It features backing vocals by Michael McDonald and a guitar solo by Christopher Cross. And the lyrics are very straightforward. It's about a man convicted of multiple murders, being chased. Of course, this is the chase scene. We've talked about formulas for mystery novels, detective fiction, and movies follow a formula as well. And one of the main features, especially for detective fiction or mystery or adventure, those kinds of movie genres, is always the chase scene. So this is basically a chase scene song from Christopher Cross. So let's take a listen to that. Okay, let's do a wrap up for the week. We first took a look at Frank Gruber's 11-point formula for mystery short stories and plotting the mystery novel, the classic approach to different articles that analyze the mystery short story and novels. Now, this helps us to analyze stories because now we know the formula and what the plot is going to take place and how one section kind of dovetails the next section and what to expect. So it's a good analytical review. And by the way, if you wish, as I said earlier, to write your own little mystery short story instead of a final research paper, that is an option as well. Okay, so from there, we talked about two TV series on American TV and probably internationally as well. One was Columbo, and the other is Monk. Each with their own unique approach to their detective style. Both with their peculiar idiosyncrasies that mark their personality and yet endear us as the viewer to champion their cause. From there, we talked about the next step after the detective from Dustin Dupin to Sherlock Holmes to Hercule Poirot to Columbo to Monk. These focus on capturing the bad guy. Now, the next step is, of course, the court proceedings. And there are a lot of mystery, fiction, short stories, novels that deal just with this part of the snapshot story. So one that became very famous was the Perry Mason series. Ran for many years, 10-year hiatus, comes back, does it again. Many stories have been written as a result of that TV series. And we had talked earlier about My Cousin Vinny being used as a model for law students in university. And I discovered a lawyer that actually takes the movie and breaks it down into its component law, jargon, procedures, and we discussed that at length. So there's a way to take a look at My Cousin Vinny movie in a totally different way. From there, another part of mystery genre is the caper story, which is taken from the point of view of the villain, the bad guy, and explaining the story from their point of view, how they did it, the planning, what happened. And we talked about a real life serial stowaway, a grandmother type that has been arrested for boarding airplanes without a boarding pass and getting through security and raising a lot of questions about how did that happen. Then we talked about a movie series, the Ocean series. We focused on Ocean 11. And there are many books written as a result of that movie as well. A caper story. And for our reading for this week, we will have a caper story by O. Henry. Again, O. Henry was one of the authors that we read about in the Lit 4 class after 20 years. So he also writes a caper story, and that'll be our reading for this week, in addition to the your review of this week's lesson. And we are getting kind of close to the end of the semester, so start thinking about some topics you'd like to research further. The mystery genre is huge, and there is no way that one semester can cover all those bases. So if there's an aspect of mystery, the mystery genre that we missed and you want to focus in on that, have at it, go for it. anything that relates to our overall course as a topic for further research is fine. Again, like I tell all my students, find something that relates to you, is of interest to you, or that you can use in parallel with some other course that you're taking. And finally, our mystery song of the week was Ride Like the Wind. The chase scene, music by Christopher Cross and Michael McDonald. Okay, so that's about it for this week. We're running out of time, so thanks for watching. See you again next week. Bye.